All right, it appears to be live. Appears that way. See how it's see if the audio is working. All right, it appears to be live. Sounds like me. So I think we're ready. All right. So yes, the last time I did not update the chat window properly, and my bad. But nobody said anything reasonable. I mean, just comments about my hair. They started talking about pot. You know, just so yeah, nothing missed. Somebody went on about dark energy as if that's a fascinating subject. You know, this tiny, minuscule amount of pressure, you know, in the universe. It's completely, mathematical contrivance. It doesn't have anything to do with anything or any kind of real observations. But anyway, whatever. Not a terribly interesting subject, in my opinion. But anyway, so really don't need this to be open, right? No, don't need that at all. So I guess we'll do some snarky comments first, and then we'll move on to Lorenz. The assumption that light moves forward. You know, when an object's moving, you can't shoot light perpendicular anymore. And people are talking about conservation of momentum and everything else in this. Anyway. So this asshole. Let's see. I guess I'll start here. Let's see. So this is something about you say you don't like religious people, yet you have mentioned your religion of evolution. Yeah, I thought I deleted that. It's a pile of crap. So I already answered that crappy crap. So yeah, so it's just this guy putting math into the comment section. Fine. Oh, look, the 90-degree turn by the Pythagorean theorem. So this has nothing to do with Pythagorean theorem. Has to do with things that aren't moving. I mean, you can't understand that this and this doesn't mean anything if you don't acknowledge the pieces are moving. Head-on collision versus this kind of collision has to do with the fact that these are objects that are moving. And so again, the argument, a simple argument is this argument has this accident, 60 mile an hour here, 60 mile an hour here, has less energy in it than this accident, which has twice as much energy in it. That's the simple argument. I really don't think you can defeat that argument. As I said, I mean, if I could make it possible for you to be an idiot and vote to be in the head-on collision versus the tangential collision, and you would be stupid enough to vote to be in the head-on collision, well, that would be a Darwinian thing, right? I mean, the idiots would get annihilated. You're the one who's a fucking twat. Anyway, so Pythagorean theorem will impart. So he says square root 1/2 of 2 plus 1/2 of times 2 squared, I guess. 1/2 squared plus 1/2 squared equals 1 divided by the square root of 2 forced down on the red bit. I mean, this is just, again, just ignore the argument being made and play this idiotic game. And the 100-degree hit imparts 1 unit of force on the black bit. So you say it's 1 unit of force when there's obviously 2 elements in the equation. So you're not even accounting for the fact, look, the point I'm making is that matter has substance because it's fighting back. The cosmic pressure is pushing in, and the matter has substance in 3 dimensions because in 3 dimensions it's pushing back. Idiot. And that all the interactions are really interactions between these little force bits. The force bits locked in matter in 3 dimensions that give us our 3-dimensionality. Our material function is made out of that function. The fact that electrons are and protons are composed, they exist in all 3 dimensions at the same time. They have force in all 3 dimensions at the same time. Idiot. So again, you just ignore my argument and argue a straw man. It's not even a straw man. It's just it's a straw man representation of my argument. It's just not the real argument. It's a bad scarecrow of my argument. All right, except that it hits diagonally, so that's 1 divided by the square root of 2 force upward. So again, this is just bullshit. You're just this is just bullshit. So he's saying, look, one minus the other force equals 0. So the two events are somehow equal. He's saying there's no difference between a head-on collision and a tangential collision. Same exact amount of energy. Yeah. That didn't take more than 5 seconds, of thinking to debunk. He didn't debunk anything. Such idiotic pile of rubbish. So instead of saying something like, see, it'd be okay. One other asshole in the other comments said something about me blocking somebody for disagreeing. I don't block people for disagreeing. I block them because they don't say something like, well, Gary, I think you made a mistake. No, they say this kind of crap. They say idiotic pile of rubbish and this kind of nonsense. You absolute dumb fuck. Why should I put up with that? Why do I have an obligation to put up with insults from some asshole who I didn't insult? He doesn't make videos. I don't go on his channel and insult him and call him a dumb fuck. He probably believes all kinds of dumb fuck things. Is that how I should behave? I should just go on his channel and say, you dumb fuck. And say, there, I've made an argument. I'll pretend not to pay any attention to what he said. I'll straw man his argument and then say I debunked him. And I should get rewarded for that. So that should be the winning strategy, in your opinion, fuckheads. No, that should be the strategy that gets you fucking blocked. All right, so second comment by the asshole. It's amazing how you can sit there and say you have such great respect for classical mechanics. I don't have great respect for it. So again, another complete straw man bullshit argument. Where did I say I have great respect for classical mechanics? Where have I ever spoken words like that? All I've stated is that they didn't sit there and make up physics. Okay, and Newton didn't speculate on what he didn't know and what he didn't have any evidence for. He explained what he had evidence to describe. He didn't explain stuff he didn't have evidence to describe. He didn't just start making up and say angels do this and fairies do that and dark invisible men do this. And that's a huge difference in what physics does now. Is it just makes shit up because it sees a little tiny, it sees an antenna pop out from behind a tree, and all of a sudden it doesn't know that Homer Simpson's just watching TV while he's taking a piss. It's not a UFO. I mean, people are just obnoxious. Anyway, and yet you don't understand the most basic concepts like momentum conservation. I've done whole videos on conservation. I point out how, yes, I think momentum conservation is really important. But again, conservation in the sense of once you put something into a circle, all right, then conservation gets a little funky, doesn't it? You can't understand how it gets a little funky. Something goes in to a tension, okay, where now the force is trapped perpetually and without friction. Now, is it or isn't it not true that this momentum can leave in any direction? Is that true or not true? Idiot. Fuckhead. I'm just saying I'm not saying there isn't conservation. I'm saying the force can go in 1 million years ago this way, and it can leave, 1 million years later going that way. That's important distinction. And yes, there's a conservation in the sense that it adds up. The push this way was a real push this way. But, that push can get lost in eons of time. Fuckhead. All right. I think that's what you call a fraud. So he calls me a fraud because somehow I'm not doing conservation of momentum by his rules. But I certainly am demonstrating every bit of respect possible for the idea of conservation of momentum. I'm not saying I'm allowed to violate it. I'm not saying any theory is allowed to violate it. So again, you can just keep lying about what I've done because that's all you can do, you lying scum. All right, anyway, but bullshitter is just as appropriate. So fraud and bullshitter for what? For understanding that, say, the sun, for example, has conserved billions of years of momentum in all kinds of different directions. and that it somehow comes out to the sun being in a position. Now the sun's moving through the galaxy and it's moving through the universe, and so its momentum adds up to a certain net velocity in the universe. Now you're the assholes who don't think there's such a thing as a net velocity. You think that it's all relative, and that somehow I can be inside a frame and inside a frame and inside a frame and inside a frame, and therefore I don't have any real velocity. You bullshitter. You douche. You dupe. All right. You say all your collisions are kinetic. Yeah, that's right. Think ping pong balls. Right. So they are conserve. So they conserve momentum, including momentum in the y component, whatever the y component is. You know, I'm sorry. A ping pong ball can only go in a straight line, so it only has momentum in one dimension. Fuckhead. That means you can't get anything for free without something else. That doesn't mean anything. I've not said anything where you get anything for free. I've never advocated for anything for free, asshole. So again, this is just such a bullshit argument. I've just pointed out that this head-on collision requires a 360 degrees of change, where this only requires 180 degrees of change. Fuckhead. And we're assuming that the change is consuming energy, asshole, is an expression of energy, asshole. Okay, that already shows ahead of time that you won't get anything out of this for free. Again, where did I say there was anything for free? Where's the argument for free? We know that if I throw a wrench, if I go out into space far enough from the Earth, and I throw a wrench, it'll just keep going. You know, I can hit Mars with my fucking wrench going 60 miles an hour, and it'll eventually get there. We know that's a fact. So that looks pretty free. Okay, one little bit of momentum in and any amount of distance you want out. And all you have to do is consume time. The only thing it costs you is time. Oh, man, what an asshole. That means you can't get anything for free without something else. So again, where have I stated anywhere that I am a believer in any kind of free energy or free to any bullshit? Nowhere have I said any such things. So again, more straw man lying about what I'm saying in my videos or what I have said over and over again. That already shows ahead of time that you won't get anything out of this for free. Saying the same thing over again. Unless you're basic geometry and arithmetic, which you do. How did that make any sense? That already shows ahead of time that you won't get anything out of this for free. And so that's somehow different than this other jackass sentence. That means you can't get anything for free without something else. So somehow those are two different statements. I don't think so. Unless you ignore basic geometry. So again, no example of where I've done that. You seem to be ignoring the basic geometry, the basic kinetic reality, and arithmetic. Well, it seems to me that you don't do it very well, which you do. So again, you're the one ignoring it. In my opinion, if you're stupid enough to think this is the same amount of energy as this, then I think you're a fucking dumb douche. All right. So, fuck off. Rude fuck. All right. Yeah. Let's see. So what's this asshole saying? Is Neil deGrasse Tyson a phantasmagoricalist physics popularizer and educator? He's a douche. Yeah, he's a clown. He's a clown for physics. Gee, you haven't figured that out on your own yet? You know, he's a Barney the dinosaur of physics. He dumbs it all down. And he's, you know, he's obviously doesn't think this shit through, right? I mean, he's the guy who said Pluto's not a planet, and then later we find out it's a planet, and Pluto's a planet, you know, and I've always played some of his clips. When one clip he says, "Oh, life's made out of the simplest things, the most abundant things in the universe. There's life everywhere, everywhere." And then another clip, life is really difficult to make create. It's very sensitive, and the rest of the universe is full of radiation, and it's really hostile, and there's no way anything's going to survive out there. So I mean, it's just full of shit. Yeah. So anyway, enough of that crap. So yes, I'll get to my agenda now. Thank you very much. So I did go to that CPS, whatever it is. They had their, oh, this was such a childish NASA video. Oh, and it was so bad, so bad. I have to play that sometimes. It's just so bad. So anyway, this CPNS video conference thing. So I have endured a whole hour of it, almost hour and 40 minutes. And it's pretty pathetic because this, with this Bill guy, he just lets him loose, this creation scientist. He just makes all these claims. There's airplanes that don't require any power to cruise. So you use power to lift it off, and then you use power to land it, but it doesn't use any power to cruise. And clearly, if there is such a plane, it can't carry any weight. Okay, it has to be an ultra light plane. And it has to be using some. I've heard of solar planes being able. Once you drag them up with a regular plane, like a glider, and then the solar plane can fly very far. If you're having a thin enough atmosphere. But that's it. I mean, this is just, he just says this shit, and so they ban me, but they don't sit there and put any restraints on this guy who just makes all these bizarre claims, all these conspiracy theories. I mean, it's it's just pathetic. It's not very highbrow physics. It's pretty lowbrow. But anyway. And, speaking of a little bit lowbrowy, the Bill Gatey guy, still suffering through some of his mush. All right, so this is the relativity, one of the relativity ones. So I like this Van Briesen guy. It's nice that he does these lectures online, and he's getting more views, so that's good. But these are terrible in the sense that he's just typing this. Einstein had this brilliant insight, blah, 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 blah. And, it's a guess, number one, and it's just totally unevidenced in any serious way. And the assumptions are just terrible. So I've sort of described before that you have to be so careful about how you word this thing. When you say, I would say that light has a constant speed and all light is traveling the same speed. There's no such thing as fast light, slow light. You can't give it more momentum. None of that shit can happen. Now, what you can do is that if you're moving towards a source of light, you'll get to the light quicker than you would if you weren't moving towards it. I mean, it's just sort of obvious. The light's being emitted and you're moving towards it. You'll get to a location that's a shorter distance away. So obviously you'll hit the light sooner than you would if you stayed over here. So if you change your position, you'll hit the light sooner. Now, the light didn't move any faster. And the trick to that, though, is that also if you're moving, you'll shift the light. So it won't be going any faster, but when you receive it, you're going to get the frequency changed. You're gonna run in because you keep banging into it. You keep changing the amount of distance. So you're not changing the distance over this long period, really. You're changing the distance every second. And as you change your distance, you're shortening the wavelength of the light. So you'll blue shift it, if you're moving into it. That's just a fact. And it's certainly detectable. So you can certainly see that happen, regardless of this frame nonsense. All right. So how do I describe this? I've attempted to. I think I like this analogy, but people just don't get it. Now, as I've pointed out, I think matter has bits in it that are moving in all the directions, and that it balances out for things that are stationary. They all look the same. Now, each thing, like all of my atoms, could be distorted in the sense that I'm primarily moving this way. My overall momentum, my net momentum is something like this way. It's always changing every second. But at this very second, it could be this way. And that would mean I have more stuff going this way than I have going that way. but I'm balanced this way and I'm balanced this way. So it tends to balance, but it can have momentum. You can have a velocity. My matter can have a velocity, and that velocity is going to be inside of all the little bits. Every electron, every proton, they're all going to have that velocity. The thing that won't have it is the force between them. That has to be manipulated to move forward. I mean, technically this is the force. I guess that's what I really wanted to point out. So this is the stuff moving the speed of light that's in there. Let's see how to make it understood. See, I could argue that it just bounces back and forth inside of an electron, but I don't think that's exactly what happens. But that would give you the idea that it's contained and it doesn't change. It's equal. Something bouncing back and forth, it's equal. It goes just as much that way as it goes this way. It goes just as much. All right. So the other analogy I wanted to use, or metaphor, was, let's say we're doing this moving thing half the speed of light or 3/4 of the speed of light. And the idea is that you have a bird cage with a bird in it, and the bird moves the speed of light. So let's say I'm stationary, and the bird moves the speed of light. Well, it can just fly in a circle, and it can be inside the cage, and it's fine. And as I've argued, energy inside of matter is basically just traveling circular paths. It goes this way, and it goes that way, and it goes that way, and it goes that way, and it bounces off electrons, and it just ends up going circular in the end. It goes as much this way as it goes that way, as it goes this way, as it goes that way, and it all equals out to a circle in the end. And it ends up where it started. And that's when something's stationary. Now, obviously, with stationary is a relative thing. So, in a sense, stationary doesn't mean you have to be stationary. You could be actually physically stationary, but obviously, we are going to surmise that in our big universe, there's probably lots of pluses and minuses to our motion. We're going 10,000 miles an hour this way, and we're going 10,000 miles an hour that way, and 10,000 miles, we're moving in all kinds of different frames. But I would say our net velocity could actually be zero. When you add all of the influences up, they could be zero, because you tend to think the whole universe has to come out to zero. So anything that's spinning this way in the universe, there's somewhere something spinning this way. There's always a yin for the yang part of the universe. To create one thing's going one way, if something's moving this way in the universe, there's some other piece of the universe that's going the other way. It seems logical, intuitively sensible to recognize that the universe started probably with a balance, not an imbalance. All right. So, and likewise for us, our byproduct momentum could be almost nothing, considering that we're being moved by different forces in different directions, and those directions can be opposite directions. All right. So you have a bird in a cage, and it's spinning, it's flying in a circle. So everything's fine. We're stationary. Now I start moving the vehicle. So now the vehicle's going to move. And the idea is the bird can't hit the bars of the cage or it dies, right? Just can't do that. So now the bird, going around and around in the cage, if I'm moving 40 miles an hour this way, what the bird's going to do is it's going to fly that little extra amount of distance in that direction. It's going to take time. So for a little piece of time, it's not going to do the equal circle. It's going to put a little more energy, a little more time flying this way. Just a tiny bit of its total time, because it's moving the speed of light. So, but you can understand that if I move faster, then it's going to be a bigger percentage of its time it'll spend going this way, not this way, not this way, not this way, not this way, but this way. So the circle will process. It will move forward, and the bird won't hit the cage. Now, my argument is that's essentially what light is. So when light goes into an atom, it's trapped in a cage. It's going the speed of light still, but it's trapped in the cage. And and so if I release it, I'm releasing it free. So if I release the bird at any one point, so say I'm moving half the speed of light, the bird isn't going half the speed of light, it's going the speed of light. And no matter which way it goes, whichever way it leaves, it will still be going the speed of light. It can't carry my momentum with it. And there's no reason to think the bird will, like I said, if I open the door perpendicular and the only way it can get out is to fly perpendicular, there's no reason to think the bird's going to fly some other direction. It's going to go out the way I let it out. So I'm just saying this to preface this video, because this video is a perfect demonstration of an assumption they make, a rule they create that, in my opinion, has no foundation, is logically vacuous, and isn't consistent with this idea that light is the constant. The speed of light is constant, and perception is irrelevant. Okay, what you think you saw or what you think you measured, who cares? What we're trying to describe is what happens. So there, what happens is they create this problem of extra distance that shouldn't even exist, because there's absolutely no reason why the bird would fly the extra distance. So we'll see if we can get to that. See what kind of crap comments we have first. Bunch of crappy typing. Let's see. The capitalism, I mean, useless rubbish. A significant factor in incentivizing modern physics to promote phantasmagorical physics theories to the public. No, it's just institutional anything. And it's all a bunch of, they fondle each other's anuses, right? I mean, it's a little love club where we have power, we have control, blah, 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 blah. And so, yes, they support each other. And they certainly don't want to do any damage to each other. And they certainly don't want to get into fistfights with each other, because they know that's just going to hurt all of them. They're all going to end up beat up, right? If they do the eye for an eye thing, like, I'll take a shot at your bullshit, you take a shot at my bullshit, they know that they're all going to end up blind and poor. They're all going to lose credibility. So it's just that kind of mechanism. It's and it's insidious and bad, because these are supposed to be scientists. I mean, it's their first thing they should really love is saying, I want the truth. They should want that above all else. And you can see how obvious it is, even in these conversations, that if you challenge their weak evidence, they panic. They get abusive. They don't acknowledge you've pointed it out. They don't answer the point. They just start insulting you. So it's, and that's essentially, what these authorities have built is a huge, they're caught in so many layers of bullshit that if they start unraveling it, they know they're all going to look like assholes, because they'll have to concede they've been just making up three bear stories. It's going to be very embarrassing for physics if it ever does an audit. Okay, an evidence audit. If physics did an evidence audit, it would find out it's bankrupt, and they're scared to death of that. Did you ever read? No, I don't read bullshit. Bertrand Russell. Why would I do that? The ABC of reality. Fuck Bertrand Russell. I think it would clear up much of the confusion you have about Einstein's theory. Fuck you some more. As well as present evidence you may have missed. I'm sorry. What would that be? Oh, you have the dumbass name of Immanuel Kant. Stupid, another fucking idiot. A god botherer. What are you, a religious kook? Ugh, God, I hate people. I don't think he has any confusion about Einstein's theory or missed any evidence. Damn right. Sid, you're clearly wrong. Oh, that's a great argument. Is that like a Kantian argument? The argument from, I'm just going to say you're wrong. Gee, what a great argument. Yeah, Kant was a bullshit philosopher, basically conceded, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Wrote a bunch of books and basically said, you know, none of this really fits together. I'm just a Christian loser. Yeah, fuck you. Says the guy named, yeah, so Sid gets it. Yeah, Emmanuel Kant, fucking idiot. He mischaracterizes bent space as an invisible well, a wall. I've characterized it as a well, a wall, a magical contraction of space. It's clearly not bent in 2 dimensions, douchebag. It's clearly not a bent fabric in 2 dimensions, shithead. Because guess what? There's 3 dimensions, you dumbass. I've used the Susskind analogy of fucking water between layers of glass. That's Susskind's analogy for what the force is, you stupid shit. He turns it into a fluid dynamics, which ends up being obviously a push force. Douche. Oh, God. You're such a fucking idiot. All right, anyway. Invisible wall, which shows he doesn't understand the equivalence principle. I understand that acceleration is acceleration. Now, the fact that acceleration is acceleration is acceleration is acceleration, you know what that means, asshole? When I see the space shuttle accelerate, what do I see to make it accelerate? I see a gigantic motherfucking flame coming out of its ass. Where's the flame pushing the fucking earth, asshole? Okay, so you don't believe in the equivalence of the consistency principle of recognizing that every fucking thing that we see in the world moves because we have to act on it with a fucking force. Where's your fucking force, cunt? This stupid bullshit that, well, gravity pushes it down the well. Well, let's say you can't use gravity anymore. Where's Susskind's? Know what Susskind describes it as? A perpetual pumping water in between the 2 pieces of glass, or a drain that just keeps pulling the water out between the 2 pieces of glass. So it has a perpetual source of energy that takes the water from the bottom of the well and puts it at the top of the waterfall. You think that's fucking consistent with anything real? God, you're such a weasel. Anyway, I haven't mischaracterized a motherfucking thing, you lying little prick. All right, well, he blocked my real account. Well, I'm blocking this one too, you liar. I mean, you just lie. I haven't mischaracterized anything. I have described bent space in every possible way, in every possible honest way I possibly can. It's just an idiotic notion. Bent space. It's a retarded statement. Bent nothing. It's stupid. You don't even know what the word space means. Space was supposed to mean nothing. It always meant nothing. For fucking hundreds of years, the word fucking meant nothing. It doesn't mean bending something. Creepy fuck. Anyway. And that's how much he believes. Yeah, damn right I don't believe in free speech. I don't believe in heckling. You're coming to my channel and lying. And I'm supposed to say, oh, that's a brilliant piece of free speech. No, that's a fucking pile of crap, fucker. And I'd throw a brick in your fucking face if I could. Fuck you. I don't have open discussions with rude, obnoxious fucking pieces of weasel shit. Make a real argument or fuck the fuck off. You liar. Try not to lie. Right? That's all. Try not to lie. Jesus Christ, these people are fucking insane. Have a fucking balls to make some videos so I can go lie about your videos and your videos, right? I'll go in the comments section and I'll lie about what you just said. And then you can see how much you'll appreciate it, fuckhead. All right. It's not a problem with reading. It's about answering fundamental questions. I have. Something like that. Let's see. He has videos on all of the comments. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Like I didn't give them their shot, right? I gave them their shot. They could have said something reasonable, but they couldn't do it. And that's the whole fucking point. If you have the strong argument, why do you have to be rude, obnoxious, and vulgar and disgusting? Why do you have to do that if you have the stronger argument and you have the stronger evidence? Why are you resorting to the poor man's argument style of, I'm just going to throw fucking bricks? You fucking cunt. Let's see. I'm sure reading a book by a mathematician is the same as watching all the lectures on physics. Yeah, and it actually has nothing to do with physics, right? I mean, mathematical models are superficial models. I mean, it's like comparing a stick to a 3D movie with surround sound. I mean, what is the better, more interesting, creation? The fucking stick or the 3D movie with the surround sound? I mean, math is a superficial, tangential model. It has two, and so many mathematical models are, as they even admit, incomplete. Newton was incomplete, and I would argue that Einstein is still incomplete. Partially wrong, of course. All right, so let's play this crap.
Welcome to our lecture online. Here we're going to explore where the Lorentz factor came from. How was it calculated? How was it derived? And even if you're not mathematically inclined and you really don't care about the mathematics, it's kind of nice to see how it was actually done.
Yeah, and all it is an averaging. So this is another one of these Pythagorean kind of things, where you basically can turn something into percentage. So you can make a line and a line, and then you can do the hypotenuse and take an average that's like a cosine. That's a percentage of the length of the other two sides, that kind of thing. And so the Lorentz thing is basically just pointing out that this time dilation factor, this relativity shit, follows this weird curved line, that's sort of like the bent space line, where there's nothing for a long time, and then it curves up, and then just, the line gets almost vertical but never goes vertical. So the line never goes perfectly vertical. It never starts off perfectly vertical, but it inclines very slowly. Okay. And then it's only when you get to like 99% of the speed of light do you really start seeing the effects. And it's just a way of it's completely just engineered. It doesn't have anything to do with any reason why it would be that way, except that they had to get rid of the affinities and the zero. The zero and the infinity can't exist. And in the process of getting rid of the zero and the infinity, you end up just creating these very steep lines. It's just a mathematical trick. And it has nothing to do with what reality will do. Nothing. Almost nothing. Let's put it that way. Almost nothing.
So you don't need to understand the mathematics. You can follow what's actually was done. Of course, this wasn't an actual experiment. This was a thought experiment.
Okay, so again, their premise for this derivative, this addition to the math, is not just a derivative, it's an addition, is premised not on evidence or something real happening, on just an assumption based on how they think the world will behave. And it doesn't behave that way. They have no evidence or proof that it behaves that way.
What if? So what if we have a train and we have a railroad car on the train, and you remove the side so that some observer from the outside can look in and see what's happening?
Right. Now, I would have liked to play the other previous videos, because at the top of the line he had stated the Einstein statement, basically saying that, light always travels the speed of light regardless of the observer. And again, that's an agreeable statement if you understand what it's saying and what it's not saying. What it's saying is that light is a constant, and that no matter what frame a light beam is in, if I put those two light beams next to each other, they're moving exactly the same speed. So if I can pull the beam going this way and the beam going that way on the vehicle moving this way, let's say, those two beams, if I can put them next to each other, are moving at exactly the same speed. They didn't get more momentum from the flashlight going forward. Doesn't propagate light combining the speed of the thing that shot it. The flashlight doesn't get to push the light a little faster, is the point. And this observer crap is just, in the examples, is just nonsense, because observers are never going to travel 99% the speed of light. I would argue the matter will not still exist. The matter won't go that fast. So anyway.
Observer B is moving along with the experiment that's being done. And of course, the whole experiment, the car and everything is moving at velocity v. And let's assume that velocity v is quite high, approaches the speed of light.
So you're on a very fast moving train. You're going to do an experiment. So now my experiment would be you have the bird in the cage. And now you accelerate incredibly fast. So as I was saying before, if I go 40 miles an hour, the bird just processes and it'll do fine. But if I'm going 99% the speed of light, the bird can't just process anymore. The bird basically has to just fly in one dimension. And what I would argue is if real matter does that, it doesn't exist in the other dimensions anymore. It has no ability to push in those directions because no part of it is going in any of those directions. So once you accelerate matter to these insane speeds, the matter can't do it because it's going to lose its dimensionality and it's going to turn into force. It's going to turn into a bird. So you can't do it to matter, where the bird can just fly in one direction. So it can always go a little faster than the train, and that's all it needs to do. And then it could wiggle a little bit. It could swerve a little tiny. See, if the train's going 99% of the speed of light and the bird in the cage, okay, is going the speed of light, well, the bird can give away a little bit. It can wobble a little. Can't wobble much, but it can swerve a little bit like this because it has a little bit to play with, that 1%. But that's it. It can't do any more circle-y shit. It can just do some waving shit, wobbling.
So the experiment is shooting a beam of light from a source to the ceiling where there's a mirror. Then the beam of light comes back down, hits a detector, and observer B measures the time that it takes for that event to take place.
Now, I thought that was Einstein's invention, the light clock. So he's implying that Lorentz had thought of it, because Lorentz was before Einstein. So I don't know what the truth is here. I mean, he's arguing that this is how Lorentz deduced his factor. I mean, this doesn't, I'm not too sure. But anyway, the premise is, I'll let him get to the punchline. But I mean, it's just so silly. This is so wrong, this assumption. And that's all it is it's a assumption they need. It's not because reality is yelling, this is how it works. They need it to be this way to do their crap. All right, so let's see. Hello, that's useless. You have a degree. Who cares? No, I have a life experience. I've watched 300 university lectures, and some of them more than once. So I don't have a degree, but I certainly have some knowledge of what's taught in physics university. Fuck.
So here we know that distance equals velocity times time. So the time is measured by b must be equal to the distance divided by the velocity.
So, I mean, it's just so obvious that distance and time are related, duh, by the fact of your velocity. Your velocity is going to decide how much distance you can cover in a period of time. Yes, duh.
And the distance covered by the light is twice the height of the railroad car. H is the height of the railroad car, so the distance is 2h, and the speed is the speed of light, so 2h divided by c, c being the speed of light.
Right, and that all would be fine if you could make this physically actually happen this way, but you can't. And the only way you can do it is you'd have to have the mirror way ahead on the car. I mean, the car has to be really, really long. And the mirror that you're going to hit has to be way, 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 way ahead in the car. So you shoot your beam up. The mirror, because the car is moving, your beam isn't. Your beam doesn't go with the train. I mean, this is where I don't think Einstein I really don't think Einstein thought light has two momentums, that it goes in two directions at the same time. It can only go the speed of light in one direction. It can't go in other directions. So this notion that somehow the light goes this way when it didn't leave going that way is idiotic. I shot it perpendicular. So I let the bird out of the cage. This is why I'm using the bird analogy. So I have the bird in the cage, and I let the bird out of the cage through a tube, so it shoots out through the tube. It can only shoot out through the tube. It can only go in a straight line. That's the rule of bird life. So when it's in a cage, it can go around in circles, but once it's free, it always flies in a straight line. So that's what light is like. Light flies in a straight line. It doesn't fly out of the cage perpendicular and then say, whoa, 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 I have to go this way. And that's what they're assuming, is that the light somehow jumps to the forward position of the mirror, way over here, and then bounces down, and somehow conveniently the mirror is there again, which it won't be. I mean, the receiving box. Why would light do that? No, the light will go perpendicular, the mirror will disappear into the future, and the light will hit the wall. That's what's going to happen. That's the physical reality. So they create this completely false reality, this assumption that perpendicular light isn't perpendicular, that for some reason perpendicular light can't happen. You can't make any, which is bullshit.
So that's the time as measured by B. How long does the event take as seen by A? Now, A is an observer on the side of the tracks, looking at the train moving past it.
So again, we should already accept that distance, velocity, and time are the only components here. And a perception is irrelevant. So there can't be a disagreement about what the light is doing. The light's doing one thing. It's moving the speed of light in a straight line and covering a certain amount of distance based on the speed of light. It can't move more distance. It can't do any of this crap.
Pretty quickly. And so according to observer A, as the event is taking place, the train is moving to the right as velocity v. So when the light is emitted by the source, it goes straight up as seen by observer B, but as seen...
So, see, the amazing part is the light goes straight up as seen by observer B and goes forward as seen by observer A. Now, how is that not a paradox right on the face, right now? Clearly, there's a huge difference if I'm standing somewhere and something moving 6 inches from my nose, and something that's moving away from my nose. You can't see it two different ways. One thing happened. Now, if the light went straight and I'm moving on the train, okay, then clearly the light, I went right past it. Okay, if I was in front of the light, the shooter, and the train's moving this way, 90% of the speed of light, so I shoot the photons up, they don't move with me. Okay, they're photons. They move straight. They go this way. I crash right into them.
By observer A, by the time the light reaches the mirror will have moved to this position right here from its original position when the event started.
Right, and conveniently, then the light knows exactly how far the mirror moved, and it's going to go into the future and hit it. And it's going to travel a longer distance to do that. And neither observer can see it any other way, because as a fact, it either traveled the more distance or it did not. It can't do both things. It can't go a longer distance and just go perpendicular. Can't do it.
Observer A sees the light hitting the mirror over there. Then it goes straight back down as seen by observer B. But according to observer A, the light will go this way, and the detector will not be here by the time the light makes it back down to the floor of the railroad car.
Right. So again, this is just the illogical assumption that they're saying the truth is the light did go forward, did go the longer distance, okay? And so the outside observer seeing how it really happened, and the observer on the train, because he's time dilated, because he's not seeing reality at the right speed, that he somehow slowed down the faster light, essentially. The light, because the light had to travel the longer path, and the only way to travel the longer path and look like you're traveling the shorter path to the other observer is somehow the reality had to change, because perception isn't supposed to be reality. There's no, this idea that he can perceive it that way, because he's time dilated. That is, he's seeing less frames. He's not seeing as many frames. So it's the fact would be is that you're saying that, well, the light really did travel the more distance, and he's seeing it as, oh no, that's the right amount of distance. Let's see what's the right way to put it. Because he's seeing less frames. So you can either think of it as him seeing less frames, that is, like the movie recorder is moving at a slower speed, the moving camera, and so it's essentially creating a fast motion video by moving slower. Because when you play it at regular speed, it's going to look like the same thing. It's just kind of less frames in it. Let's see how else to get to the core. I mean, we've been over it so many times, there's just no point. I'm just saying the fundamental premise is they say it's some kind of physical fact that the light traveled the longer distance, and that the person on the train, because he's time dilated, didn't see all of that distance. And that's why he thinks it just went the normal up and down, is because he didn't see the extra distance or experience the extra time. So the argument is that the observer outside sees light move slower because it travels more distance. Yeah, right? Sees light move slower. He has to see it move faster, because again, how do you change the time? If it went more distance, then it took more time. So he has to think it took too long. Why did the light take so long to go up and down? Well, because it's going forward. Well, anyway, so it's all just an assumption based on a thought experiment that light doesn't go straight up. That when I let the bird out, the bird flies forward. Even though I said go this way, even though I made a tube and said fly out that way, somehow the bird goes this way. And that, that's the premise for their argument, that's the reality. Light moves forward. It's affected by the motion of the emitter. The emitter does change the light. So unlike what Einstein said, the emitter has no influence on the light. This clearly says the emitter has complete influence on the light, because it will change its physical direction. I argue the emitter can't affect the light. It can't push it, can't pull it, can't do any of this crap. Once it's emitted in a direction, it moves in a straight line, the end.
So this is the path that the light takes according to observer A. Now, here's the key. According to Einstein, observer B and observer A both see light moving at the speed of light. So therefore, since according to A, the light has to travel a greater distance, that will obviously take a longer time. And so the time that A measures the event for, how long the event takes, is longer than the time is measured by B.
Kind of obviously, right? And clearly the time would be more than the straight path of up and down, or the path of crash into the side of the wall where the light's actually going to go. So anyway, I'm just saying this is the foundation of their mathematical continuity, and it has to do with an assumption about this extra distance that has nothing to do with any fact.
Simply because Einstein presumed that light travels at the same speed for every observer, Therefore, if the light has to travel a greater distance,
right, and there's just no evidence for that. And again, it's just intuitively impossible for every observer. um, but again, this perception word is the real mistake. What they're really saying is your rulers break, your clocks break. So what the time you measure is broken. It's not the observer on the train is measuring the length of the event wrong, because the event had to have the forward thing. It had to move the longer distance. So clearly the person on the train has a broken ruler, a broken clock. He's not measuring time correctly. But again, this isn't going to happen. There's absolutely no reason to think photons can't go perpendicular.
it's just going to take more time. So let's figure out how much more time it's going to take according to observer A.
All right. So I don't know if the figuring out part means much. I mean, just as a bunch of goes just through the math, keeps flipping things out. Let's put the square root of 2 over here, and we'll flip this over, and then we'll multiply by 0 on both sides, and we'll do the blah, blah, blah. You know, the typical mathematical crapola to come up with the classic Lorentz bullshit of 1 plus v squared over c squared. You know, the classic piece of crap, catch 22 silly slope. All right, so let's see if there's any comments worth reading. Then we gotta decide whether to read any more of this. All right, so oh crap. Oh, you can't hang around long enough to figure out what goes on, right? So you just gotta make silly comments. Well, I watched 3 minutes of this, you know, and I'll start making irrelevant comments, not relevant to the actual subject. You know, some comment about how long you been making videos. Are there any W's in your name? Fuck you. All right. Let's see. I think he meant nope. I don't dope is a good word to use. I didn't dope is a good use, isn't a good word to use. I don't know. Anyway, think, yes. But who is he talking to? Who? Question mark. Is there any interaction with chat people? I don't think you are, you know, people by, you know, some definition that has a standard. You know, talking donuts. I don't know if a talking donut is a person. All this talk about light. Oh, now we have Bert Russell. Yeah, right. Like that's a real name. Anyway, going perpendicular reminds me of the time Gary pussied out of doing a laser bending. And so it never happened. Never pussied out of anything. The laser's still over in the other house. You know, the argument is this is not a great location to do the experiment. There's only about 7 million trees everywhere in every direction, you stupid cunt. So exactly how do I shoot a laser 1/4 of a mile, which would be ideal, or 1/8 of a mile, when there's trees everywhere? How do I do that? Anyway, which would have proved him right. Well, again, I already explained how it can't prove anything because the laser diverges so much that you can't possibly measure the changes, because the laser diverges so much that any movement in the laser beam itself would be undetectable from the amount of divergence that has consumed the center. Jesus, and earned him a Nobel Prize. So I guess I'll just delete you. This is just crap. Sorry, my space bar is a piece of. You're a piece of shit. you know. It's not your space bar. The trouble isn't with our space bars. It's with yourselves, fuckhead. Don't be blaming your space bar. You're a piece of suck. A stupid fucking cunt of a piece of suck. Jackass. When did he ever do that? can you refer to a video? But what is the main thesis? Oh, he wants to. He wants it all. All right, I have changed the default. So now on all of these videos, my email address is listed because there's no PMs anymore. And then the playlist for the overview videos and the playlist for the question videos. Really not terribly tedious, not long videos. I mean, the overview videos are obviously a little longer than the question videos, but yeah, start there, fucker. What we arguing about? I just love people who just show up and say that kind of. What you talking about? Oh, yeah, I'll just rephrase it all just for you, fuckhead, because you're so fucking special. Gee, I just, people have such, your mommy. What did your mommy, smell your poo for you? I mean, how did you become such a self-obsessed piece of shit? I'm going to show up and just say, everybody pay attention to me. What? Fill me in. What's been going on planet Earth for the last 50 years? I haven't been paying any attention. So, it's amazing assholes. Physics. I don't see any physics here. All right. The whole fucking from the very beginning to the very now point, it's been a discussion of physics. And it's just an amazing pile of crap. These people just to keep typing this shit. This is probably not exactly the right video, but consider the video comments and experiments regarding light. What that is, but okay. Can you give a timestamp? He shows his laser in the video, but I don't remember much more. Oh, that's just amazing. So he does all this paraphrasing about what I did and says I weaseled out of something or wimped out or some other kind of bullshit. When clearly I would have liked to have done the experiment. I did mark a tree and I put a piece of glass on it and was saying, but yeah, something came up at that time. I can't remember what it was, but I did point out in one of the videos, I actually videoed the fact that you could see the laser beam, in the morning when there was fog, and it was really pretty impressive because you could see it go really far, and it's just this laser beam going across the yard, which was kind of neat. I clearly wanted to do the experiment. It's just I don't have the property. I mean, I can't go walking in other people's backyards at 4 o'clock in the morning. Do you understand how that might be seen by my neighbors as a little bit strange? What's this fucktard doing in our yard in the 4 o'clock in the morning and 11:30 at night? Obviously night would be the time to do it. Oh, anyway, dark. He shows his laser a bit, but I don't remember much more. I don't have a time stamp in mind. It was an hour-long video. Just amazing the crap these people obsess about. However, the history, as I recall, is that Pirro suggested it. Yeah, but Pirro's an idiot. Pirro just does not, like I said, first we had to get Pirro to concede that, yeah, the laser beam diverges. So you're trying to measure a millimeter, okay, of the center of the light. That would be the overall intensity of the light as a center. And you're trying to measure a millimeter change in that, when the entire beam of the light has diverged, whatever, 7,000%, from this to this. So obviously you can't measure on this outside edge, the noise edge, the tiny difference in the overall blah, blah movement. It's going to get lost in the noise. Let's see. However, the history, we already did that. And DS later said that the beam spreading is too large. Yes, so there, you remembered. So why are these people lying? Physics means experiment and empirical observation. These are just out of reality assumptions based on false 1915 GR physics. What are, what's your definition of empirical observation? Is an even an experiment. I mean, do you think the assumptions built into their eraser experiments are valid assumptions? I mean, clearly experiments are all just about assumptions, right? I mean, do you think Huygens is a real thing? And if you do, why don't you answer my question? Why does Huygens affect photons differently when there's one slit? And then just because I put another slit next to it, all of a sudden Huygens works entirely different. Why that inconsistency, shithead? Fuckhead? Retard? Anyway. Let's see. No, I just asked what we are talking about. Well, the video is titled Light Relativity. Yeah. So it's sort of just a little bit of a light conversation about relativity, but specifically it's about light and the theory of relativity. And I've gone on a whole frickin' thing about explaining it in the video. And you don't really want to pay attention, that's fine. But I'm just saying, you show up halfway through a conversation. Again, you want everybody to just bring me up to speed in a physics conversation, right? A physics conversation that has really lots of components to it, and you're just saying, yeah, just give me the condensed version of everything that was said for the last hour. Just an idiot. No, you discussing meta. No, not real physics. Fuck you. Special and general relativity models are not physics in classical perspective view. Again, I have no interest in being part of any club. So the word classical is idiotic in my opinion, and modern is idiotic. There's rational and there's made up. There's evidence-based physics and there's just bullshit, pull out of my ass speculation. FFS, get a collimator. You were told this. So again, this idea that you can artificially stabilize a laser beam with a mechanical. You can put another noisemaker in the experiment, and it'll make everything clear. I don't think it works that way, retard. Hero doesn't have a dick, so it's obviously a fake account. And I'm smarter than you for your info. Yeah, whatever. I don't like people using other people's identity, so I'll block you just for that. That's very rude to take other people's name and do anything with it, you fucking cunt. Even though Piro is, brain dead, he's, you still shouldn't even steal the name of the dead. What an argument. Yeah, there's no argument, of course. It is pathetic, the lack of rational arguments. So I don't know. Let's see. Do I need to? I mean, there was a couple other videos. There's like sort of a related subject. This whole thing about what light is. And how you can well, as I pointed out in the car wreck example, this idea that you could create a mechanism where there's more force going one way because you're head-on collisioning and less force this way because you're only right turning. So there's little subtleties to this thing, but I just think my analogy for what light is more sensible to understand that when something is affected by force and increases its potential energy, that it's doing it by trapping the force, trapping something moving the speed of light. So when a photon goes in and it doesn't come out, in the way you can feed electricity into a battery, for example, you're feeding the photons in by increasing the pressure between electrons, essentially. Well, again, all you have to do is compress electrons to increase their potential because they'll spring back. So it's not really collecting. So it's not entirely accurate. Let's see, how to explain a photon capture. But clearly a solar panel or something like that, you can see that it's getting captured in the sense that the photons go in, they get stored as pressure, voltage, and that pressure can be released. I mean, the only way you can have more pressure, the only way you can compress the electrons is to apply a force. So I mean, The little bits have to create the pressure. So that's their capture. You can't make more pressure unless you create more stuff pushing them together. And so that's essentially the trap between the ping pong paddles kind of idea or the circle idea. The trap is the stuff is still moving the speed of light. It's just trapped inside the matter. Or your vision of photons, which apparently is some notion that the photon is absorbed, is no longer a photon, is no longer energy, and that somehow it's converted into sandwiches or something. And then you turn the sandwiches back into photons, which I just don't think is the way the universe works. I don't think these pieces, I don't think electrons and protons are sophisticated enough to convert something moving the speed of light into sandwiches and then reconvert the sandwiches into the speed of light. It has to capture the stuff as it is. That is, it has to capture photons as things moving the speed of light. So they're like birds in a cage, and they have to obey the rules of a caged bird. And they will obey the rules of a caged bird when you let it go. It doesn't care how fast you were going. The bird is always going the speed of light. And no matter how fast I'm going, it's going to leave, just flying the speed of light. So if I'm moving 90% of the speed of light and the bird is flying ahead of me in the cage and just veering a little bit to slow it down, technically, right? So it veers a little bit because it can give away a little bit of, it can waste some directionality because it's going a little faster than the cage. But the point is, if I set it free, it's still just going a little bit faster than the cage. And if it's still veering like this, just a little tiny bit more because it left the cage, a little straighter, it can just, be right behind it. It can just stay a foot ahead of the cage and just wobble a little bit. Now, if it leaves perfectly straight, like I said, if the rule is once it's free, it has to go straight, it can't wobble anymore, then it will leave, revealing that 10% difference in speed, but it'll only leave 10% faster than the cage is moving. It won't leave the cage at the speed of light. The cage is still moving 90% of the speed of light, and the bird isn't going to be going much faster. That's the reality. All right. Let's see. What an argument. Okay. Hey, Gary, could you take on, analyze this? It's my own work. One assumption that mass energy, not curves, but expands space. No, I already saw some kind of crap about this. This whole expanding space curve shit is just crap. Space is nothing. Nothing. Even if you made more space, it's nothing. Nothing could notice there's more space. You can't push space. So if I made more space and it made the space more, hey, there's too much space. I'm getting cramped in this empty space. It's cramping me. I mean, it's just the wrong notion of reality. The space is nothing. It's not a something. You can add more and pressurize the space with more space pressure. It's just a completely wrong way to look at reality. You should be all sued for using the word space when you don't think it's space, when you think it's ether, or you think it's mud, or it's jello. What we see in atoms, stars, and galaxies. What you see, okay? You see, not what everybody has to believe. All we see is redshift. And there's lots of ways to explain why over great distances of time, there might be something called redshift. And why also we have no understanding of whether redshift happens when an object moves perpendicularly to our motion. Because technically, this point is closer than this point. So clearly something moving this way would blue shift, theoretically. It's not just about going forward and back. It's about moving towards your three-dimensional space, shortening the distance. I think this is why all 21 physics is wrong, whatever that means. So I guess that means 21st century. Jesus. All of it's wrong. I mean, this is just such overstatements. Einstein's stupid creation of a fake force that doesn't involve any energy is wrong. Quantum mechanics and their silly virtual photon bullshit to account for the movement of magnets is silly, empty, vacuous. Doesn't say anything, doesn't explain anything, is useless as an explanation. All right, anyways. So how does that create Combs' law force? In what sense? What's your argument about Combs' law? Well, here we go. If electrons push each other by the ping pong balls going back and forth, then you only have the inverse law, not the inverse square law. Why? I mean, it's 100% of the force is delivered in the sense that the ping pong balls all hit. So your argument is that I'm doubling it between two electrons, right? So where's Combs' law say? Let me see how to put this. Combs' law deals with charges. Now, technically, I've argued this before, that you can sort of understand that the inverse square law always breaks down when you get very close to another object. So Combs' law doesn't deal with electrons next to an electron, because that is just the R law. I mean, double the distance, half the force. Okay. But that's because the electrons are really close to each other. So you can understand that the inverse square law, is this idea of something spreading. Well, if I'm bigger, okay, than the spread, right, then technically I'm already destroying the inverse square law, because now any point source, so if there's point sources along this pen, technically from the perspective of this electron right here in this middle, when I bring these things close together, that electron is guaranteed to hit this pen. There's almost a zero possibility of it missing. So at close enough proximity, there is no inverse square law, because you've now pretty much guaranteed the force is always going to hit the other side. You can't miss it. All right, so I think I've answered that. Combs' law is about charges, not individual electrons. Going back and forth, then you only have the inverse square law, not the inverse square. Okay, fine. So I've answered that, I think. Where's your evidence that Combs' law applies to electrons inside of atoms? I guess it would be my argument. Let's see. And if you okay, I only have right here. And if you invoke the shadow argument, never in the case of electrons and protons, I don't even invoke the shadow argument. I mean, really, it's just an analogy. It's used just as a metaphor. What's an analogy? Frankly, it's a real thing, shadows. But I've always pointed out the force has to be absorbed. So it's really just about absorbing force in a direction. You have to absorb it before you can prevent it from, before you can create the chateau. Idiot. All right, anyway. And if you invoke the shadow argument for large scales, then you have the shadow argument giving the 1 over r squared. But those bits in between take twice as long to bounce when you double the dis. So that's, fuck you, you're an idiot. What do you mean? But those bits in between take twice as long to bounce when you double the distance. Again, it has nothing to do with it. There's no direct communication between the Earth and the sun. The gravity exists no matter where the position of the Earth is. It doesn't require the round trip to take place. The gravity that it's reacting to is essentially the gravity I'm creating. I say the moon is affected by gravity. Well, it's affected partly because I am absorbing force in a direction. Anyway, have you had the shadow? But those bits in between take twice as long to bounce when you double the distance. So that's another factor of 1 over r. So you end up with 1 over r cubed. No, you don't. Hence, you end up with the inverse cube law. No, you don't. You're absorbing a force that doesn't get somewhere. So there's three, we could argue, okay, this is the Earth, this is the sun, or this is the moon, this is the Earth. The point is there's force hitting this from all directions, right? And hitting this from the other side. And the idea is that a certain percentage of that force, when you're in free space, you absorb a percentage of it from every direction. So you basically just Browningly motion. You move a little this way, then you move this way, and then you move that way. You absorb force in all the directions. Now, if I put another object in the way, another object constituent to this object, the idea would be is that this object will not get hit by a piece of force from this side. We could just say a random one that doesn't hit here. And for one moment, there'll be extra force coming from this way. For that one moment, it'll absorb a little. When it does that, that force that was going this way won't hit this thing. And then this thing, okay, it's inductive. I've used this word 7 million times. Gravity is inductive. So then this force doesn't hit this. And so then this ends up just by the laws of averages. It gets hit by more tails than heads. So it moves in the direction of tails. And when it does that, it's absorbing a piece of force going towards this that doesn't get there. That means this gets hit by less. And so it goes towards it. So it just is inductive. But again, the force already exists. The gravity already exists even before this thing showed up, because the gravity is essentially being created by the forces moving everything towards the center of the Earth. And the fact that the center of the Earth is molten is a symptom of the amount of pressure that's being created inside the Earth, absorbing energy. All right, anyway. Let's see. Yes, Gary, but I see thermal expansion. Yes, Gary, but we see thermal expansion. Yes, that's what happened in gravity. We see stars expanding where? And we see galaxies accumulating mass energy in nucleuses also. It says you. Galaxies, from my perspective, it seems quite obviously as they get old, they get bigger. They're falling apart. They're not contracting. They're breaking apart. They're not something moving towards the center. There's stuff moving away from the center. The center is weak. The mass of the galaxy is in all the little stars. Unlike the mass of our solar system, all the mass is in the center. You can't use the same perceptual view of gravity for the two examples. The galaxy example has a weak center. The solar system example has a strong center. Most of the mass in the galaxy is in all those little stars. There's not much mass circling the sun. Not much at all. And there's certainly not mass on both sides of the solar system. So obviously the two sides, if I took the center of the galaxy and removed it, what do you think is going to happen? Do you really think the galaxy just fly apart? Or do you understand that those arms are basically gravitationally pulled towards each other, and they're not going to fly apart very fast because there's lots of gravity pulling them towards each other? All right. Expanding on whatever. I really hate this capitalization bullshit, but whatever. Atoms slash space expansion. Fuck you. Equals Bohr. Niels Bohr was a douche. Quantum jump on higher orbit. How does this even mean anything? Space expansion. Says you. Space expand. Nothing expanded. No. And it really doesn't have anything to do with set orbits. Set orbits has to do with the fact that electrons are repulsive to each other. So just like the field lines on a magnet are in kind of set locations because of the intensity of the repulsion of the iron filings when they line up, the iron filings will repel each other because they're all lined up in the same direction. So they're all repelling. They all have the same north-south orientation, all the lines of iron filings. And that ends up creating a set amount of distance. Well, the same thing happens in an atom. The iron filings can't exist in between the two magnets. It either has to jump to one or jump to the other, but it can't live in between them because they're repulsive. Would you say the light trapped inside the matter gives the matter its very mass? Well, I've pointed out mass is just force in a direction. That's all mass is. We have mass because we create force in a direction. When you put us on a scale, we're accelerated in a direction. And so mass is being able to push back. If you can't push back, you got no mass. So as I pointed out, yes, the electron has to have mass in all three dimensions. It has to have elements pushing out in all the dimensions, in all the directions. So yes, that's what mass is. And as you start to be a piece of force, that's just mass in one direction. Force, photons only have mass in the direction they're moving. They have no mass sideways or in any other. They only have mass in the direction of the motion, where matter has mass in all three directions, in all three dimensions. All right, it gives it very mass. Or is it another force that moves at light speed? There's only one force technically. Okay, that's why it's a unification theory. It's all one force. All you can do is send it at a frequency. All right, that's the electromagnetic spectrum. And if you filter it with a magnet for the two types, proton force, electron force, then you call it magnetism, but it's really just gravity. It's all one force, one thing moving the speed of force. There's the speed of force. The speed of force covers the electromagnetic spectrum, which has light in it, magnetism, and gravity. That's the speed of force. I mean, I should just emphasize that one. It's as obvious as the push-pull argument is the speed of force argument. We shouldn't be calling it the speed of light. We should be calling it the speed of force. The force. All the forces have the same speed. Ugh, anyway, right now read my next part. No, I don't want to read anything. Just fucking type, you douche. It's good you took it all back, right? Yeah, good. What I am claiming in my theories, Gary, well, I'm not really interested. I mean, my purpose here is to contrast my theory against the conventional bullshit. It isn't to debunk your shit. You do that on your own time. Is that space is being creative effectively due to mass, energy, temp. Well, whatever. Hot nucleus. Well, that's just so enlightening. You think you're going to explain your silly theory in a few sentences, huh? Well, I don't think you're going to do it. And again, why do I need your theory? I already have one that works. Do you understand? I don't see any problem with mine. Why would I bother looking at yours? What we see in three scales for atoms, stars, and galaxies also. So again, I just don't give a shit about fucking galaxies and all this shit, okay? I mean, physics is the small universe. There's only one universe. It's the small universe. So stay in that ball game. Let's see. I meant the area argument. Whatever. Let me actually rewrite this. Oh, please. I acknowledge that the argument about the area spreading provides the 1 over r squared law on large scales. Yes, but in the case of electrons on large scales, again, it's just irrelevant. They're always point particles. You can't just say there's large scales. And as I pointed out, it happens with plates. If I took two charged plates and I put them very close together, the inverse square law will no longer be true, in my opinion. It just won't, because most of the substance will not be inverse square lawing. Whatever. It won't be subject to any possibility of missing the other object. Yes, but in the case of electron on large scales, again, I just don't know what that even means. You also, I just hate this, stop with this capitalizing useless words, have the factor that the tons, their force bits, bouncing take as long to go in between upon doubling the distance. Your argument is obviously that's the doubling of the distance is the reason why the force is cut in half. So what are you talking about? That's a silly argument. We've already accounted for the extra distance. You can't count the distance twice by saying it took twice as long. I mean, it's just idiotic. We've already accounted for it by the amount of distance covered. That's an additional 1 over r factor on top of the 1 over r squared argument. No, it isn't, you stupid idiot. I'm talking about charged metal balls, not plates. Well, I don't care what you're talking about. I'm talking about fucking electrons. Electrons aren't mechanically charged balls or any of this other crap. They're electrons. They are the monopoles of magnetism. That means they're 100% magnetic. 100%. Not 50% or 10%. They're 100%. In your model is taking the background radiation tricky or negligible. Is taking. I don't know what that means. They must have meant something else. In your model is taking the background radiation tricky or negligible. The point is the background radiation can only be measured when the stuff is at a frequency. When it's electromagnetic spectrum force. We can't measure the force of gravity unless we do this experiment. We can't see the force by seeing it move electrons because they can only be moved by force at a frequency. They can only create a magnetic discharge when they're moved by stuff at a frequency. Is that the right way to say it? They can only be, we can only measure them when they are moved at a frequency. So I'm just saying when force doesn't have a frequency. So if I had something in the electromagnetic spectrum and it had no frequency, that is, it didn't come at certain periods within a certain polarization, how would you know it existed? You wouldn't. You'd have no way to measure it besides doing this. Oh, that's it. There it is. I saw it do that. Okay. Let's see. If you say electrons themselves don't follow the 1 over r squared law, yes, I'm saying electrons communicate with each other directly, 100%. Yes, they aren't, how to say this? Yeah, there's no other way to say it. It's 100% reflective. There's no passing through. There's no anything other than a complete reflection. So yes, electrons don't obey the 1 over electrons. The force on the monopole scale is not the inverse square law. Again, you haven't demonstrated where the evidence is that it is. An electron can't be considered a point charge. It's an electron, it's different. Which I'm allowing you to say that. How does it emerge for the charged ball? The ball is made of an electrons. It's the whole point. So the ball is getting its charge from a bunch of electrons exposed on the surface of an arc. You understand? So it's having direct interactions, but they're all a bunch of individual electrons having direct interactions. When the two magnets are repelling each other, it's hitting other electrons. So, from one, there's force trapped between the two magnets. Since all this side of the magnet is all reflective, that is, it's all electron force. Well, it isn't all. Obviously, the magnets come in different amounts of strength, so they're not perfect magnets. But if we assume them to be perfect magnets, the argument is that, yes, the force is trapped constantly, just bounces back and forth because the magnet is a filter and it repels from the filter. So it just constantly bounces the force back and forth. Jesus, what else to say? You have to account for the fact that the matter is made of protons and electrons and empty space. The electron on electron, the empty space stuff has nothing to do with the force interacting between it. The force doesn't change its direction. So once it's bouncing between two electrons, it keeps bouncing between the two electrons. I don't know how else to say it. It's the force. The electrons aren't excreting gravity. Let's see. How is there some other way to say it? Because that's not exactly what I want to say. When electrons are moving, they're making gravity. When they move, they have to move. They have to absorb energy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Welcome on a journey into theoretical physics, revealing that exactly the same mysterious force which is in the heated kettle. I mean, this is just poetry nonsense. Magically transforms liquidino gas substance, whatever the fuck that shit is. What are you quoting and what are you talking about? Ugh, responses for uprising the universe structures and expand of material cosmos. Okay, I'm just done with this. Your paper is a pile of rubbish. I'm uninterested. You understand? I've said it to you pretty clearly. You want to argue that your theory is right. Fine. Go make some videos defending your theory. I'm here defending my theory, and I'm defending it against the specific existing theory that I have to tear down, that I want to replace. I have the truth, they have nonsense. That's my ambition here. My ambition isn't to explain to you why you're full of shit. It's known that charged balls do follow 1 over r squared. So where did I deny that? But you say the electrons individually don't follow the electrons on electrons specifically. Yes, they don't. So I'm simply asking, how do you derive Coulomb's law for charged balls then? Again, I don't have to. I pointed out already, there are a bunch of point sources. So now it depends on what surface you've put them on or how densely you've packed them in matter will decide what their function is. But it isn't a fractal or something. You can't say electrons are the round ball, like the Earth is aluminum or something. You can't just reduce it that way. How else to say? I mean, electrons create the nature of the repulsion. The nature of the force is in the contact between the electrons. And the fact that from, let's see, at a distance, how do I make this understood? Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about the gravity argument again and the absorption problem. Electrons can't absorb energy. They have to exchange energy. So if an electron goes this way, it has to give up something going this way or something going some other direction. So you can almost argue that it always has to do the full exchange of energy. That's part of the explanation. The other part has to do with the energy it's releasing. When you do move it, the energy releases perpendicular, right? So the movement of the electron means it's absorbed this and it releases something going perpendicular. That's the EMF. All right, so that partly explains it. So obviously there's always a scattering of force. So when force goes into something and there's electrons in it, they take the force going one direction and they have it go out some other direction. And in magnets, that direction is always going to be the red stuff going one way and the black stuff going the other way. And so that right on its face is an acknowledgement that the magnet isn't doing no, that doesn't change the inverse square law any. Well, anyway, I'll have to. I'll write down this problem. So you want an answer to why electrons aren't doing the inverse square law. And again, that just seems so obvious to me. It's because they're face to face to each other. So how can they do it? The inverse square? They can't miss each other. It's not possible. So the basic rule is the force hits the electron, it causes a reaction, which is the electron moves, okay, and it gives back the opposite force. So when it goes this way, it does the equal and opposite reaction, which is it exchanges a piece of energy going this way. So it absorbed one piece and it gave back another piece in the opposite direction. So I mean, it can't. All right. Well, I'll get to it. I have an argument that connecting the 1 to r law point of an electron to the 1 over r squared law for charged balls is likely not going to work out. Okay, that connecting the 1 over r law for point electron to well, you have an argument, but where's the argument? Saying you have an argument doesn't mean anything. I see. So let's see. Individually don't follow the inverse square law. So I'm simply asking, how do you derive Ohm's law for charged balls then? Well, the inverse square law is a consequence of the scattering of force across an entire dimension. So the inverse square law means you're doing this and you're doing this at the same time. So you're diverging this way and this way. Now, there's no argument that electrons respond by diverging force, where gravity does. Gravity counts anything that has a component in the right direction. So going this way means you went 20% this way. right? This way means you went 20% this way. So it counts it as this way. It's motion in this dimension, if you understand. So that's how the force comes back in any one of these, in any one of those dimensions. Any one of that half sphere is where the opposite and equal reaction can come back. As in, it can do three of these, 30%, 30%, and 30%. Those would all add up to 90% of, and you could add another 10, so you could go 30, 30, and 40 and say there's your 100% in this direction. So you had something coming in this way, and you equalized it by 30% this way, 40% that way, and 30% this way. Because I think that's close to the right answer. All right, good, Gary. But even if you want to discuss, your thesis must be known, clear, and visible. Yeah, well, I have a website and I've made 5,000 videos, you dumb cunt. For example, I claim mass expands space. Well, fuck you. I don't care. What's yours then? Yeah, I don't give a fuck. I'm totally uninterested in the tiny bit of evidence we have to deduce about what the fucking universe is doing, the fucking galaxies and the fucking Big Bang and all that crap. There's shit worth of evidence. It's a useless subject. Again, I can't say this over and over again, but I will say it over and over again. There's only one universe. It's the small one. Shit for brain. I gave an argument connecting the 1 over r squared to point electron to the 1 over r squared charge balls is likely not going to work. Well, I don't know if you gave an argument that means anything to me. Sorry. Yeah, it's not an argument that means anything to me. I don't get your argument. I'm saying that the big pieces of matter have a bunch of electrons in them, and those bunch of electrons are basically doing this thing. They're scattering the force in all kinds of directions. The individual electrons aren't scattering anything. So that's the difference. A bunch of electrons are pointing and oriented and have magnetic moments in all kinds of different directions. If I could use the term, I don't want to say electrons have a magnetic moment. I'm saying they have a direction they're moving in, and it's their direction that creates the inverse square law. So the motion of the electrons can be in all kinds of directions to account for force in. So yeah, I've already sort of said this. So that's the spreading in the sense that it changes something that's going directly in one direction into a force that's spread over multiple interactions that have 100% of a component in the right direction, but they're made of things that have other components. All right. I have an argument connecting. Okay, no, fuck you. I will say this. I actually wish you weren't kicked out of the John Chappelle thing. Well, yeah, well, without me, it's just a fucking, let's listen to another one of Crazy Bill's stories. I think it would have been given I think it would have given a moderated forum to decide which arguments make sense. Yeah, well, I mean, everybody has to use their judgment, about what's a waste of time. And Franklin's pretty willing to listen to almost anything. The great thing about him, he actually listens to people's arguments. I mean, he really does pay attention, and he does remember what they've said. And not too many people do that. So he really is quite good at what he's doing. But he needs better material to work with. And I just think having conversations about some of the stuff is just useless because some of the conversations are just based on no people reference, well, it's a government cover up, or well, I've read the secret paper, but it's not, there's no fucking evidence for what they're talking about. And it's like, what's the point of talking about things for which there's no evidence? Anyway, LOL is probably not a good thing to say either. Yeah, well, whatever. You say you wrote 5,000 new theses. What are you talking about? Are you insane? So maybe just you can't listen well at all. So maybe just one main one. I mean, I've already articulated it. I put it in the description of the video. There's videos called overview video that explains my theory. Shithead, my unification, my very simple unification theory, shit for brain. Let's see. How and where differently you understand science concepts and compared to officials. All what you are talking about is non evidence. Fuck you. I'm just done with this. You can just fuck off. The evidence is it fits all the evidence. The theory explains why magnets move into each other. The theory explains why the Earth is accelerated towards the sun. The theory explains why protons and neutrons and electrons are held in tension inside of atoms. you know, the theory explains all of this stuff, fuckhead, with a real force. Just fuck off. I mean, really, I probably have 1,000 videos by now. I mean, I hate to even think to look, but it's probably getting close. 1,000 videos, and these assholes show up and say, "What are you talking about?" Ugh. So at least we're now caught up because we don't have distracting conversations. So, but we've probably gone on long enough. So I do have, I'll do some work on the pointing out that yes, the reason why electrons are different than things made of electrons is because electrons do everything straight line. And when they're in a group, they're all pointed in different directions. And that's why the force is spread in the directions. Because the electrons aren't pointed in the same direction, they're not moving in the same direction. Where an individual electron is a monopole and it's interacting in one direction between one thing. It's not gravity. It just, can't be the inverse square law in that sense because it's not a mixed force. Well, I wish people understood both sides, whatever that means. I still stand by what I said at the exact beginning, or whatever. I'm supposed to remember what that is. I was aware of your point that bunch of electrons spread force. Yeah, no, I'm saying it's valid. It's obviously a valid point because I'm obviously not coming up with some brilliant, oh, here it's so fucking simple explanation for why there's a distinction. But the distinction has to do with the fact that the electron is the origin of the force. The interaction between the force bit and the electron is the origin of the force, and that the origin is different than the collective. So, I mean, obviously, the the interaction between two electrons has to be more direct. Saying it has to be more direct doesn't make any sense. I know that's not saying it precisely enough. It can't. Its point sourceness is undeniable. There's no center of gravity. You could almost argue for the electron, right? There's no center that the force could be radiating out of between two electrons, right? Two electrons don't worry about the center of gravity of the electrons because the force isn't some tiny force that radiates in all kinds of directions. The force is actually a ping pong ball bouncing between the two paddles. So it's not ping pong balls flying out in all kinds of directions and all that shit. Even though that's happening inside the electron, I'm saying the interaction that it senses is this real one between the two electrons. Still doesn't say it simply enough. All right, I have to come up with an analogy that acknowledges the difference. between, yes. I'm just thinking, my brain thought of shoes and saying, well, the rubber part meets the road, the leather doesn't. I mean, it's the electron is not, like I said, it's not a fractal. You don't take the little bits and make them into solar systems and do. They're different things. And I'm just saying that the fact that the electron is the monopole is the fact that it doesn't function the same as the mixed, um, a bunch of electrons. One electron is not a bunch of electrons. I mean, one hamster isn't a bunch of hamsters, right? I mean, a bunch of hamsters go in all directions. One hamster goes in one direction. I mean, there's no, I don't know. One hamster is very one dimensional in its function, where a group of hamsters is not one dimensional. Maybe it's the fact that I have to go to the force argument, that the force bit is what's causing the interaction, and the force bit can't can't vary its momentum, can't change its momentum without something changing it. And maybe that's the trick. So it can't um, it can't do the force addition math. So it can't take a 30% and then 30% and call that a 60% in this direction. It's 100% or nothing. That might be the better argument. It's all or nothing. There's no, you can be a little off. It's all or not. It's either hit or miss. I've probably said it in my previous video somewhere. There's probably a better way to analogize it. I'm just not remembering it. But close enough. Mr. Keebler. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you enduring and persevering to listen to this kind of crap. But yeah, you're a funny guy. I have a couple of your videos I haven't watched yet, but I have to go watch. Wild Horses. Is that the famous song? Yeah, it'd be pretty funny on the ukulele. Anyway, Silence of the Lambs song. Like herding a group of Himalayan cats. YPMV. I don't know what that means, but yeah. Well, I mean, I think I have. I think understanding the pressure point between electrons and the fact that the force is between the electrons. The electrons don't emit something. They're not radiating forces. They're just trapping them between them. And that's the key to voltage. I think that's such a great. I mean, to me, it just fits so obviously. That's what happens. I mean, that's how you create this pressure thing called voltage. It just seems so obvious that the voltage is the fact that you're compressing the electrons. And why does compressing electrons matter? Well, because there's something bouncing between them. And then the whole bouncing thing, creating a frequency, as you take things and you bring them in together, and it all end up doing the resonant frequency thing. Just makes so much sense. I mean, it's just so much of this stuff. I mean, it's like a lot for one person to be doing. It'd be really great if other people were also trying to fix it. You know, because I'm just going by the 7 years I've been doing it and how much more I've tied together. I mean, it's tied so many things together. I mean, I didn't start off with a unification theory. It just fell into it. All right. By the way, one advantage of conversion QM, convention QM, is that the math derives the light spectrum for hydrogen to high precision. These are just claims. But what's so special about, I mean, hydrogen's the simplest atom. And what about this? I mean, the math is just a recognition of variables, right? So, I mean, what is there to derive? Um, you know, I guess I just don't understand how there's anything special about figuring out the light spectrum for an atom that only has one electron, one proton, and one neutron, right? I keep forgetting which hydrogen you're supposed to. I mean, all you have is a proton and an electron. What the hell is hydrogen? I mean, you have tritium and deuterium. You know, and I forget which one I'm supposed to. Which one has the extra neutron and which one has the extra proton, something like that. But I would argue that the orbit thing probably isn't the way it's working. I mean, I would argue that hydrogen is a straight line molecule. That's why it's so reactive. And that it's helium is where it starts to do the X thing. So it looks the same from all sides, and that's where it's less reactive. So hydrogen's highly imbalanced where helium's more balanced. So I would argue that hydrogen is proton, electron, neutron. So it's the proton, the electron, then the proton part of the neutron, and then another electron. So it has a proton at one end and an electron at the other end, technically. I mean, if you consider neutrons as protons and electrons, right? So you can arrange the hydrogen atom. Let's see, I can actually switch cameras now, I think. So let me try this just for fun. Well, close enough, not too distorted. And I should be able to switch cameras. So we'll just see if this works. And such. And take a second. Oh, it did it. Didn't even take that long. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so that's just too especially cool and fun and great. So let's say we'll just make these brownie things. So this would be let's say this is the neutron because it has an electron. And now we have one more electron and one more proton. So let's just say that the other electron is over here, which means it can get close. And then there's the proton over here, right? So that would be the constituents of hydrogen. Essentially, you could argue are two protons and two electrons is a hydrogen atom. If you consider the neutron, this thing, the neutron, as a hydrogen, as an electron and a proton, because that's what it degrades into. So now you're just trying to say what's the possible geometry you can create with those four elements, and with attraction. So the protons are attracted to the electrons are attracted to the protons. So the electrons can get closer to each other than they would normally by going through the proton, because all the electron force leaves perpendicularly. So there's no reflections here, no reflections here. Now, if the two electrons were in some other position, like over here and over here, and then the protons were here and here, then the two electrons would repel here, and they would be attracted, and that would be constant reflections. So they couldn't get very close this way. And the protons would be doing the same thing, repelling each other, but they would be attracting here, 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 and here. So anyway, there's different ways you can look at it. I don't know why I've started with that. I don't know. I don't know what the end was for that bit of crud. What was the point? Yeah. So all you're saying is QM can derive how much pressure there is between these elements inside of a hydrogen atom. So what? I mean, they're just going to be formulas, right? I mean, I don't know what you use as the tools to measure these forces, but you just know that the charges are balanced in a sense. The total amount of charge is balanced in the sense that you have two positive charges and two negative charges. Anyway, let's see. No, okay, one advantage, same statement. Okay, so nothing's been added. So he said QM is that the math derives the light spectrum for hydrogen. Yeah. So again, the light spectrum, my argument would be is always going to be the force that is relevant to the electrons. That's the electromagnetic spectrum. So it just has to do with what possible distances the electrons could be from each other would decide how they move. But obviously you only see the spectrum of hydrogen when you blow it up, right? So you have to it's a funny thing to think about, right? I mean, how do you see the light spectrum of an atom? You see it by disintegrating the atom and releasing everything that's in it, right? Let me think that through. Yeah, I'm having a hard time with it because I'm thinking, okay, so when you're burning something, the light that comes off the flame is the amount of energy released when you're breaking apart atoms, when you're separating atoms. So the spectrum for hydrogen would be the bonding spectrum, wouldn't it? Isn't that the light you're releasing? Is the light from the binding spectrum? Or are you actually destroying the hydrogen atom? I would argue you're not destroying the hydrogen atom, right? I mean, a flame isn't burning hydrogen, it's converting. So like if I burn hydrogen and oxygen, I'm converting. If I'm converting hydrogen and oxygen into water molecules, so I'm combining them and releasing a certain amount of energy related to the fact that the extra electrons of the oxygen are released and the hydrogen replace them in bonding to the oxygen. So the oxygen has, say, 8 or whatever electrons, and the hydrogen lets this electron free and lets this electron free and takes the places of those two electrons and binds to 2 of the electrons. I think the hydrogen binds to 2. I think. I don't remember for sure. Maybe it's just 1. But anyway. And it's releasing the superfluous electron. And the superfluous electron was bound by the oxygen molecule. Well, so I guess you could argue that the hydrogen lost its electrons and just stuck with the protons. Well, anyway, so it is an interesting question about what frequencies of light you would emit, and it has to do with how close together the electrons are that are released, because that would define the frequency of the force that still remains. But it wouldn't be producing. I'm trying to think of how long a ray it could possibly produce while the electrons separate, because they're no longer part of the atom, so now they're free, and then they separate, and then the ping pong balls are released. Yeah, so there would have to be a series of them bouncing. Yeah, I have to think about that one too. That's a good one. Spectral lines. What creates spectral lines? I mean, what exactly are you releasing? All right, so yeah, I'll write that down. Um, uh, and I just got to think of a way to say it so I remember it. What do I mean? All right, so the frequency of the individual photons in the spectrum. Yes, I don't even recall where the spectral lines for hydrogen are. I don't know how many there are. I mean, there can't be too many, right? I mean, it's the simplest atom, can't have too many spectral lines. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I don't see any comments, right? So nobody's commenting, right? I mean, I'm not missing something, right? Somebody just type something. Well, I'll type something. Yeah, that way I'll know whether it's still working. Yeah, type. Yep, it works. Yeah, I mean, I guess somebody, it would take, maybe it's too much to write. But yeah, my brain is just trying to figure out what causes spectral lines. And it's basically separating one atom from another atom, but you're not destroying an atom. Very strange. Well, you are destroying the atom in a sense. One of the atoms gives up its electron, perhaps, too. Um, yeah, well, all right, yeah, something I have to think on. This is just common chemistry that's causing spectral lines. You don't need any kind of nuclear event. So it's a funny point, because you could argue that when a sun is burning, you could argue that it's helium being created, and yet you're reading it as hydrogen spectrally, which doesn't make sense. Yeah. Well, I have to think on it. All right. So it seems like the chatters are dead. So whatever's going on, it seems like something has failed. you know, I guess. Oh, yeah, I have failed. Something's gone wrong. So I guess the drawing thing didn't work. Oh, still in there. Well, yeah. So I guess it's just people have died or fell asleep or something. Okay. Well, we could get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. And yeah, I think I've said enough. So till the next time and such, so forth and whatnot.